Moss-laced boulders clung like jaws around the narrow cave mouth, exhaling a faint scent of charred stone and wet copper. A single rope hung down, impossibly clean, its fibers tense, yet instead of swaying in the breeze, it sank steadily, drawn into darkness by an unseen pull. A perfect circle of dead insects ringed the threshold, their legs curled skyward. Somewhere deep inside, the stone released a sound, not an echo, but a breath. He didn't come to the forest to live, he came to disappear. Peter Morgan hadn't spoken to another human in over 4 months. He didn't miss it. His world was compact, efficient, and quiet, exactly how he needed it to be. Perched on the edge of Sutter Ridge, his converted ranger station stood like a forgotten watchtower above the endless green. Trees grew too thick for cell signal. That was the point. Each morning began with silence and structure. Water from the rain barrel. 2 eggs. 1 sketch. He kept a thick, leather-bound notebook filled not with birds or deer, but with tunnels, collapsed tunnels, every one of them real. He drew them in charcoal with obsessive detail, twisted rebar, pancaked concrete, the point of initial failure. On page 28, a narrow service shaft imploded at the base. He'd drawn that one from memory. Peter was once a lead engineer on the Linvale Transit expansion, the same tunnel that failed before opening. 7 dead. 47 injured. He remembered the sound more than the lawsuits, a groaning, metallic breath, and then the earth swallowing itself. He never built again. He never explained. Instead, he moved north and lived simply. Rain-fed solar power. No contact. No apologies. On the 4th morning of the 2nd September since he moved in, a sharp thump pulled him from his routine. Something had collided with the station's side wall, something heavy. He stepped outside and found a deer, limping, shoulder bloodied. But when Peter approached, the animal bolted, bounding downhill with unnatural speed. Curiosity overruled caution. He followed. For 30 minutes, Peter tracked broken twigs and faint prints. The forest felt different here, heavier, though no clouds covered the sky. The usual forest chatter was gone. Even the flies that normally swarmed blood were absent. The trail ended in a thicket of tangled ferns and jagged stone. That's when he saw it. A cave mouth, narrow and knotted with moss, as though the mountain had tried to seal it shut. The air escaping it smelled wrong, not decay, but something more mechanical. Charred stone and wet copper, maybe. And in front of it, like a relic from his nightmares, a climbing rope, knotted around a gnarled pine, descending into the cave's throat. He knew that knot. Peter crouched, staring. The knot's particular wrap, a twin bowline with an extra loop, was one his crew had used. He'd designed it himself for vertical descents in narrow shafts. Only one crew ever tied that knot the same way, his. He reached out but stopped short. In the dirt beneath the knot, someone had traced a faint message with a stick or nail. Blueprints don't breathe, Peter. The handwriting looked shaky. Almost childlike. But it was unmistakably his own. Peter stood. His fingers trembled. He scanned the forest behind him. The trees didn't move. But they felt closer. The rope twitched, not from wind, but as if something below had just gripped it. The cave didn't just change around him, it adapted to him. Peter returned the next day, with a headlamp, gloves, chalk, and rope of his own. He hadn't told himself he'd go in, not aloud, anyway. But he couldn't stop replaying that knot. The handwriting. That message in the dirt. He stood outside the cave for 10 minutes before moving. Silence pressed in from the forest. The insect circle was still there, untouched. He tried to ignore it, stepping carefully over their tiny husks. The moment his boot crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped 5 degrees. He clipped his harness, checked the carabiner, and approached the lip. The original rope, the one with the knot he recognized, was still descending into darkness. No slack, no sign of movement. Like it had been placed there just for him, and then forgotten. Instead of trusting it, Peter drove his own pitons into the rock and began marking the cave walls with chalk every few feet. A system. A pattern. Familiar, reliable, unlike anything else here. The descent was short, maybe 15 feet, and opened into a wide chamber with a low, sloping ceiling. His light flickered twice. Natural minerals, he told himself. Not uncommon in deep stone. Not unnatural. But then he saw it. The chalk mark he had just made on the entry wall, a thick white X, was no longer bright. It was sinking into the stone, fading like ink into paper. He touched the spot. The surface felt damp. Warm. He made another mark. Watched this one closely. The X shivered, then slowly smeared itself into nothing. Peter exhaled hard, backing up. He tested 3 more marks on different walls. All faded, slowly, deliberately. As if the cave was choosing to erase them. His breathing tightened. He moved deeper, into a corridor that curved slightly. The deeper he went, the more the walls began to shimmer, not with light, but with a strange rhythmic texture, like ripples in slowly freezing water. At the 3rd junction, he hesitated. And that's when the wall to his right moved. Not much. A subtle contraction. Enough that when he blinked, the hallway he'd just passed was gone. Replaced by a solid wall. He froze, spinning. The way he'd entered, also different now. The slope had sharpened, the ceiling bowed lower. The cave was rearranging itself, not randomly, but reactively. Peter backed up, heart racing. He ran his fingers along the wall, feeling for texture or seams. The stone throbbed beneath his palm, faint but steady, like a weak pulse. Then he saw it, a faint carving, etched into the wall, glowing faintly red like heat behind skin. Not a symbol. Not a rune. A sentence. Simple. Crooked. And written in his handwriting. Not again, Peter. His mouth went dry. His headlamp flickered, just once, and in that second of dim light, his reflection flashed in the wall's surface, not stone anymore, but mirror-like. And that reflection blinked. Peter didn't. His reflection's eyes were slightly too dark, its head slightly tilted, just enough to be wrong. He stumbled back, gasping. The illusion vanished. The wall was stone again. He pressed a hand to his chest. His heart wasn't racing anymore, it was matching the pulse in the walls. In sync. Like the cave had found his rhythm. He reached for his chalk instinctively, but the piece in his pouch had crumbled into powder. Every system he relied on, memory, mapping, control, was unraveling. From deep ahead, a second heartbeat began, heavier, slower, and it wasn't his. Some descents begin with a rope. Others begin with guilt that never let go. Peter didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, lights off, staring at the ceiling while the forest exhaled around him. The sounds of the night, owls, wind, distant rustling, were there, but dampened, like heard through walls of water. He'd seen things. Felt things. But what terrified him most was how familiar it all felt. The layout, the feeling of pulsing under his feet, the flicker of movement just outside his light, it mirrored his own collapsed sight from years ago. But twisted, like a memory remembered wrong. By dawn, he'd made his decision. This time, he would descend fully, not to explore, but to confront. Maybe it was guilt hallucinated. Maybe some cruel trick. But if the cave wanted him, it would get him. And if it was built from his mistakes, then maybe he could end it. He packed heavier, food, backup batteries, 3 lights, rope, crowbar, and a flare. He wore his old harness, dusty but functional, and taped a photo of the Linvale crew inside the front pocket. He didn't look at it. Not yet. The cave greeted him like it had waited. No wind. No smell. No birdsong. He paused by the insect circle. Something had changed, they were gone. Not scattered. Just, gone. The moss still framed the cave's mouth, but the stone above now bore a single thin crack, jagged as lightning. A seam, maybe. A reminder the mountain wasn't done splitting open. He clipped his rope, ignored the old one still hanging nearby, and descended. The vertical drop was longer now. Maybe 20 feet. The wall texture had changed, once rough, now soft like pumice, almost yielding to his gloves. He stopped once when a patch of stone depressed under his boot, like bruised flesh. At the base, the chamber greeted him again. But this time, the passage was different. Wider. Waiting. Peter followed the main tunnel, using nails and tape to mark junctions this time. Not chalk. Not anything that could fade. Half a mile in, he found something new. An alcove. Shallow, but wide. Its walls were polished like obsidian, black and mirror-like. In the center lay a helmet, partially buried in dust and stone flakes. He stepped closer, hesitant. It was his helmet, the one he'd worn the day of the collapse. Same green stripe. Same scratch across the visor. And on the back, a dent, a very specific dent. He remembered it clearly. He'd slammed it against the tunnel wall after a survey error was ignored. Just before everything went wrong. He picked it up. It was cold, like it had been in a freezer. And as he touched it, he felt a tug behind his eyes, like a headache blooming inward. He dropped it. And then the wall behind him shifted. At first, he thought it was a tremor. But no, it wasn't shaking. It was breathing. The surface swelled, cracked, and a thin seam of light appeared, like an eyelid opening. He stepped back. The seam widened, revealing a passage he hadn't seen on the way in. It hadn't been there. It couldn't have been. A stale gust of air rolled out, not earthy, but sterile. Hospital sterile. Beneath it, something else, a sound. Hissing. Mechanical. Rhythmic. Like a ventilator. He raised his light and shone it inside. The walls of the new chamber were lined with curved metal struts, half buried in stone, as though a structure had been swallowed whole by the cave. There were panels, wires, pieces of rusted rebar twisted into loops. And far at the end, barely visible, a door. Industrial. Bolted. And pulsing with faint orange light at the seams, like something inside it was alive and waiting. Would you open a door the earth itself had sealed shut, just to see if your worst mistake was still breathing behind it? As Peter stepped toward it, the door breathed in, and the floor beneath him lowered a full inch. Stories lose their shape over time, but every one begins with a truth someone buried. Peter needed answers. He hadn't touched the door. Not yet. But just standing near it had left him reeling, as if something on the other side had tasted him. Whatever lay beyond wasn't just buried. It had been deliberately entombed. The next day, he drove to the nearest town, Dunvale, a sagging outpost of shuttered diners and hand-painted signs. The library was one room. The bar had 2 patrons. The air smelled like rust and cut wood. He asked questions carefully. The bartender, a woman with half-moon eyes and too many stories, paused mid-pour when he asked about the ridge. "You been up near the old ranger station?" she said without looking at him. Peter nodded. "Don't go past the line of stones. That's where things stop acting right." She didn't elaborate. No one in town did, not directly. But they offered fragments. A teenager once emerged from the woods after a week missing, face bloated, hair white. He never spoke again. A hunter vanished near the ravine and returned 6 months later with both legs fused at the knees. A Firewatch drone caught footage of an open chasm in the hillside that was gone the next day. The stories felt exaggerated, until Peter met Dr. Calder. She wasn't local. She was a seismologist who'd rented an upstairs unit over the old post office. Her room looked like a command center: maps, pinned notes, ink-streaked graphs showing rhythmic seismic patterns all radiating from one source, the cave. "You've been inside, haven't you?" she asked. Not an accusation, a recognition. He didn't answer. She didn't press. Instead, she showed him an old ranger's notebook she'd obtained from archives, dated 1967. Its leather cover was cracked, pages frayed. One section was dog-eared, titled simply, Mimicry Chambers. Inside were drawings of tunnels, but lined with human features. Ribbed ceilings that looked like spinal cords. Walls resembling flayed palms. One diagram showed a stone surface etched with teeth. "It adapts," she said quietly. "Not just to terrain, to people. To memory. Thought." Peter turned the page and found a rough map. The outline of the cave resembled something he couldn't quite place, until she overlaid it with a neurological scan. The layout matched a human brain. Synaptic structures. Pathways. A central, hub, chamber perfectly aligned with the amygdala, the fear center. Peter's mouth went dry. "It's not a cave," she said. "It's a system." She pulled up a satellite image on her tablet, time-stamped from 4 days ago. Infrared overlay showed heat signatures across the ridge, pulsing in timed intervals. One pulse had just appeared. Not near the cave. Not in the forest. In Dunvale. Inside the town's graveyard. Peter leaned in. "A second cave?" "No. The same one," Calder whispered. "Rerouting." He felt a chill grip his spine. It wasn't expanding. It was reproducing, cellular, not geological. They sat in silence. "You've seen something, haven't you?" she asked. "Down there." Peter hesitated. Then he told her about the helmet. The door. The fading chalk. The writing in his own hand. Her hands trembled as she reached for her notes. "There was someone else who reported this once," she said. "Back in '93. Said the cave spoke to him using his father's voice. Said it showed him blueprints he'd never drawn, for machines that didn't exist yet." Peter swallowed. "What happened to him?" "He went back in," she said. "And didn't come out." She handed Peter one final photo, a satellite scan from 2 hours ago, showing a third heat pulse forming, beneath the floor of his cabin. "Some memories are buried to protect us. Others are buried because they're still alive." Peter drove back to the ridge with the satellite photo trembling in his pocket. The heat signature below his cabin wasn't random, it was shaped like an eye. Perfectly round, centered beneath the floor where he kept his sketches. Watching him from below. Back at the station, he ripped up the floorboards. Beneath the insulation and dirt, he found a slab of stone, smooth, unnatural, a perfect disc embedded in soil. It wasn't there when he moved in. He would have remembered a lid in the earth. The stone vibrated faintly as he touched it. Not from movement, but from sound. A low hum, just beneath the threshold of hearing, but tuned to his bones. It made his molars ache. Carved into its surface, a symbol he hadn't seen before, a circle wrapped in a broken triangle. He didn't understand it. But his hands did. Almost without thinking, he pressed his palm to the center. The stone sank, silently, and revealed a narrow cavity lined in metal and bone. Inside sat a small, square box, no bigger than a shoebox, cold, gray, and sealed with an old brass latch. He lifted it, breath held. It was heavier than expected. And on the top, in faded ink, were 4 numbers. 1986. His hand froze. That was the year etched on the safety briefing before the tunnel collapse, a document misfiled during planning. A number that had haunted him for years, even though the project hadn't officially begun until 1988. He opened the latch slowly. Inside, a child's drawing. Crayon on yellowed paper. A stick figure man standing beside a dark shape labeled, "The Cave," in red. Overhead, a sun with a frowning face. Above the figure, in shaky letters. "Dad, don't go in again." Peter stared at it, heart pounding. The figure's head was shaded black. The cave entrance had red eyes. Beneath the stick man's feet, faintly, the word Theo. He staggered back. Theo was the name he and his wife had picked, years ago, for a child they never had. The miscarriage had come early. He'd never seen a sonogram. Never heard a heartbeat. Yet this drawing looked aged, the paper worn, the style of someone 7 or 8 years old. He turned it over. On the back, another message. "The cave lets me watch. But it won't let me talk anymore." His stomach twisted. He dug through the box further. There was more, a small metal toy car, the kind he collected as a boy. A fabric swatch from one of his old company uniforms. And finally, a Polaroid photo, faded but clear enough to recognize. Peter. Standing in front of the very same cave. Only younger, early 30s. Smiling. One hand holding the rope. The other resting on the shoulder of a child with their face scratched out. The date stamped on the bottom read. August 19, 1995. But that was impossible. That date hadn't happened yet. It was 2 weeks from now. He dropped the box. Outside, wind began to howl, low and circular, as if spinning around the cabin. The floor pulsed once, then again. The open cavity sealed shut without a sound, erasing all sign it had ever opened. He looked at the drawing again. The figure's black head now had lines branching out from the eyes. New lines. Fresh. As if drawn while he wasn't looking. Peter packed the box, sealed it, and threw it into the truck. He drove straight to Dr. Calder. She opened the box slowly, eyes narrowing. "You said your child never survived," she whispered. "He didn't," Peter replied, barely able to speak. "Then how did he send this from inside a sealed chamber? What would you do if someone you never met remembered your face, and warned you not to repeat a future you hadn't lived yet?" As they turned the photo over again, a new line had appeared, "He's going to open the door." Memory is fragile, and the cave knew exactly where to press. Peter returned to the cave alone. He didn't tell Dr. Calder. He didn't say goodbye. The box sat locked in her apartment, and the drawing's message, "He's going to open the door," beat against his skull like a ticking clock. But it wasn't fear driving him anymore. It was certainty. The door wasn't waiting for him. It was inviting him back. This time, the descent was shorter. Or felt shorter. The cave's layout had changed again, wider in some places, tighter in others, but smoother, like it had grown used to him. Adapted. The breathing walls were no longer subtle. The moment he stepped through the first corridor, they contracted slightly, then relaxed, like lungs recognizing a breath they'd once held. When he placed his hand against the stone, it gave way just enough to imprint the lines of his palm, holding it a heartbeat longer than comfort allowed. He moved deeper, following the same path toward the chamber with the sealed door, but the air had changed. It was thicker, almost gelatinous. Every step dragged, like walking underwater. Then he noticed something worse. He'd forgotten his wife's name. He stopped mid-step, heart pounding. It was gone, just gone. He could picture her face, her hair, the way she used to hum when chopping vegetables. But her name? Nothing. He gasped, then fumbled in his jacket for the old photo of his crew, the one he always carried. He unfolded it. But this time, the writing on the back was wrong. The names were there, but his was missing. In its place, Theo Morgan. Tunnel 3. His hands trembled. He felt dizzy, light-headed. The walls around him brightened, not with light, but with clarity. As if they were watching him closely now. Then he found the chamber. It wasn't as he remembered. The door was still there, still pulsing with dull orange light at the seams, but now the chamber was lined with stone faces. Human. Dozens of them. All partially formed, as if caught mid-scream, mid-blink, mid-breath. Some were weathered. Others still glistened like freshly molded clay. He stepped closer. And stopped dead. One of the faces was his own. Not similar. Exact. Carved into the wall at his eye level, mouth slightly open, frozen in a shape of horror. As if captured the second before he realized something too big to handle. He reached out, touched the stone lips. They were warm. Then they moved. The mouth opened slightly, and his own voice, broken, older, spoke. "This is the collapse you never escaped." Peter stumbled back, nearly falling. He turned to leave, but another face now lined the exit wall. A child. Its eyes sealed shut. Its lips trembling. He stepped forward, hands shaking, as the child's mouth opened too. It didn't speak. It screamed. A sound that wasn't sound at all, a pressure that cracked in his ears, rang in his teeth, burrowed into his spine. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. His own memories began to fracture like shattered glass, his first blueprint, his first kiss, his mother's final words, all slicing past him, out of reach. He crawled back to the center of the chamber, gasping. The door was now open an inch. Light spilled through the crack, not warm, not cold. Just, true. Peter reached out, not to open it, but to stop it from widening. And something inside touched back. Not a hand. Not a creature. Just recognition. Like the inside of the door was shaped to fit his thoughts. And then, for the first time, he remembered something new, something impossible. A memory of his son, laughing, outside this cave. But he'd never had a son. Right? Behind the open door, a voice echoed, Peter's own, but it was singing a lullaby he didn't remember learning. Not all echoes are sound. Some are lives, yours, if things had gone differently. Peter stepped through the door. It didn't open wider, it just let him in. One moment, the orange light poured around him. The next, the world had changed. The space was impossibly vast. No ceiling. No walls. Just a field of black stone tiles, stretching in every direction, each glowing faintly underfoot like lit stepping stones in a void. Floating above each tile, orbs. Not like crystals or glass, more like glistening drops of memory suspended in motion. Inside each one, scenes played out in looping silence, buildings collapsing, trains rushing past, people crying, laughing, screaming. Some showed tunnels. Some showed families. Some showed him. He approached one orb and saw himself at a child's birthday party, a son with brown curls and his wife smiling beside him. A life that never happened. But he felt something as he watched, nostalgia. As if he'd lived it already. As if his body remembered it even if his mind did not. He moved to the next. This Peter stood in a courtroom, triumphant. The tunnel never collapsed. He'd made the right call. He was awarded, celebrated, known. But his face looked empty. Lonely. The wife absent. No child. Then another orb. He saw himself underground, buried alive, whispering a name, Theo, over and over as darkness swallowed him. No rescue came. That orb flickered as if unstable. Peter began to understand, these were not dreams. Not predictions. They were stored versions of him, played like backup files. Lives the cave had preserved. He looked around. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Some were faded. Others pulsed brightly. None were false. As he moved between the orbs, one shifted. Not floated, stepped down. A figure emerged from a nearby orb like it had been poured out. Another Peter, same age, same face, but paler, gaunter. He walked with a limp and wore a jacket Peter had lost years ago. His eyes were dark. And bleeding. Thin trails of red leaked from the tear ducts, streaking down his cheeks. His mouth trembled. He whispered without sound. Peter stepped forward. "What are you?" The other Peter's lips moved, and this time, the sound came through. "Don't choose me." The voice was barely audible, like breath on glass. Peter froze. "Why not?" "Because I begged it wrong." The other Peter reached into his coat and held something out, a wedding ring. Peter recognized it instantly. It was the same one he'd thrown into the river the night his wife left. But this one was engraved inside, "We build or we break, L." His fingers curled involuntarily. The ring was now in his own palm. He didn't see the transfer. It had just happened. The bleeding Peter stepped backward into his orb. The moment he re-entered, the orb dimmed, then froze, locking him back inside. Peter clutched the ring. Every version of him had come here for something: forgiveness, understanding, a second chance. But not all had been allowed to leave. Some chose wrong. Some never left at all. He noticed something now. The brighter orbs, the lives with more pain, more loss, were positioned closer to the center of the chamber. The dim ones, where everything worked out, they sat near the edge. This place didn't reward comfort. It preserved meaning. Every failure, every wound, every sacrifice, they were valuable. Peter looked down at the ring again. He understood what the cave was offering now: not erasure, not redemption. It was choice. But not for free. From behind him, another voice called out, his son's, whispering, "You only get to keep one of us." He thought the cave had chosen him. He was wrong, it had only begun. Peter didn't remember leaving the archive. One moment, he stood in the ring of orbs, the wedding band warm in his hand. The next, he was outside, staring at the forest floor, dirt in his nails, blood on his palms. The cave mouth behind him was sealed. Not caved in. Sealed. The stone bore no crack, no entrance, no trace of passage. As if it had never opened. As if it had never existed. He staggered back to the cabin. But it wasn't the same. Every picture frame on the wall had changed slightly. His sketches had been replaced by unfamiliar blueprints, curved chambers, structures that spiraled inward, not outward. His calendar was still flipped to September, but the days were wrong. Holidays in places he didn't recognize. Some crossed out in red. Dr. Calder was waiting. She didn't speak when she saw him, just stared, trembling. Then she pulled him inside and showed him the footage. News broadcasts. All over the world. Identical caves appearing overnight, one in the Andes, one in southern Siberia, two in the deep sea off Iceland. In every case, the reports mentioned the same phenomena: vanishing paths, mirrored memories, people coming back, changed. But worse, they all began on the same day Peter touched the door. "That's not coincidence," Calder whispered. "It started with you. It's spreading." Peter said nothing. She showed him seismic readings. Each new cave pulsed in sync, like a neural network waking from sleep. "Not expansion," she muttered. "Synchronization." Peter's heart sank. And then came the final blow. She showed him a live broadcast from a Denver news channel. On screen stood a man named Peter Morgan. Same name. Same face. He wore a navy blazer, no limp, eyes sharp. Calm. Confident. Explaining to reporters about the geological anomalies near Sutter Ridge. Peter stared at the screen. The man's voice matched his exactly, but the cadence was wrong. Too smooth. Too rehearsed. Then he noticed the detail. A faint scar beneath the man's left eye, the same scar one of the archived orbs had shown. The version of Peter who had chosen a different life. "He's not you," Calder whispered. "No," Peter replied hollowly. "He's the one who left something behind." The footage cut again, this time to a town in Oregon, where a child had drawn a cave with red eyes on his bedroom wall. His mother claimed he'd never been near a forest. "Others are waking up," Calder said. "Dreaming in languages they've never heard. Seeing people who don't exist." Peter turned away. "Some versions of you were meant to stay in the archive," she added. "What if one got out?" The ring in Peter's pocket felt heavier. Hotter. He stepped outside. The woods had gone still again. But now he felt something else, not silence, but attention. The forest wasn't waiting. It was listening. He pulled a small, folded blueprint from his coat. It hadn't been there before. It was drawn in a hand that wasn't quite his, a spiral structure shaped like a seed. At the bottom, a signature. Theo Morgan. He remembered now. His wife used to call him Theo when they first met, short for Theophile, his middle name. It was on the first blueprint he ever made, back when he was just a student dreaming of building something that mattered. But that man died in the collapse. Or maybe, that man was still inside. Would you reveal to the world that you'd opened something meant to stay buried, even if it meant someone else already took your place? As Peter turned back toward the ridge, the trees bent slightly, not from wind, but from something large moving beneath them. You don't get to erase the past. But the cave offered him something stranger, the power to choose which version lived on. Peter stood at the ridge for the last time. The forest felt different now, not darker, not louder. Just, aware. Like it had taken a breath and was holding it, waiting for him to exhale first. He carried nothing but the ring, the blueprint signed Theo, and the memory of a lullaby he didn't remember learning. It echoed in his mind now, gentle, unfinished. The cave didn't reopen for him. It never needed to. Instead, the forest floor split. Silently. Grass and roots peeling back like skin to reveal a spiral staircase descending beneath his cabin. No stone. No vines. Just smooth, soft black steps that gleamed without reflecting light. He descended. Each step erased a memory. He knew it as it happened. First, the face of the man he replaced at the tunnel site. Then the smell of his childhood kitchen. Then the first time he heard his wife say yes. They slipped away like worn cards shuffled out of the deck. He didn't resist. He reached the chamber, not the archive. Not the mimicry walls. This place was different. Clean. White. Quiet. A chair sat in the center, angled toward a floating screen of soft blue light. A console beside it hummed faintly, like breath behind a closed mouth. Peter approached. The screen flickered, revealing two profiles. Peter Morgan. Status, collapsed. Memories, fragmented. Outcome, unresolved. Theo Morgan. Status, preserved. Memories, restricted. Outcome, available. A prompt blinked beneath the profiles. Choose survivor. He stood there, heart hollowing. This was the cave's gift. Not absolution. Not salvation. Selection. One life could continue. The other would be archived, memories compressed into echo. A version of him would walk free, but with no memory of guilt. No wife. No child that may or may not have existed. No collapse. Just a blank slate. Just Theo. He looked down at the ring. We build or we break, L. His wife had written that in the margin of his very first blueprint. He had forgotten. Until now. He closed his eyes. She deserved a version of him who didn't carry this weight. One who could draw without fear. Live without shadows. He reached forward and pressed Theo Morgan. The console chimed. The screen dimmed. The air in the room shifted. As if something had finally relaxed. In a small lakeside town 300 miles away, a new engineer arrived to begin work on a hydroelectric redesign project. His name was Theo Morgan. Quiet, thoughtful, meticulous. His references checked out. No next of kin listed. He worked hard. Sketched often. Liked walking early in the morning before the sun rose. Said he used to dream of caves, but doesn't anymore. His co-workers joked he was born to design. Theo would smile and shrug. He wore a simple band on his finger, though he never mentioned a wife. Inside his office drawer was a folded drawing he didn't remember making, a boy holding his hand, walking toward the outline of a cave. Far beneath the ridge, in the silence of the sealed chamber, the chair remained empty. On the screen, the archived profile blinked one last time. Peter Morgan. Status, dormant. Outcome, accepted. Would you erase the only people you loved, just to become the version of yourself who never broke?